My name is Susan Martinez. I am 56 years old, divorced for 8 years now, and I work as a high school guidance counselor in Phoenix, Arizona. I have 2 children, my daughter Rachel, who is 30, and my son David, who is 28. For most of my adult life I have been the safety net, the problem solver, the one who makes sure everyone else lands softly when life gets hard. I live in a modest 3-bedroom house in Ahwatukee, the same house where I raised my children after my divorce from their father Miguel. The house has good bones, as they say, with southwestern charm and a backyard that faces the desert mountains. The mortgage is almost paid off now, a milestone I reached by working extra hours and taking on summer school counseling positions year after year. My daily routine is simple and predictable. I wake up at 5:30 each morning, make coffee in the same blue ceramic mug Rachel gave me for Mother's Day 6 years ago, and spend 20 minutes on my back patio watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Then I get ready for work, drive the same route down Chandler Boulevard to Desert Vista High School, and spend my day helping teenagers navigate college applications, family problems, and the countless small crises that feel enormous when you are 17. I love my job. There is something deeply satisfying about being the person students come to when everything else feels impossible. I have written thousands of recommendation letters, talked countless kids through panic attacks before SATs, and helped families fill out financial aid forms in 3 different languages. My office walls are covered with graduation photos and thank you notes from students who went on to college, started careers, got married, had children of their own. But if I am being honest, my proudest achievement has always been my own children. Rachel, my firstborn, who was valedictorian of her high school class and earned a full scholarship to Arizona State University. She studied business and marketing, graduated summa cum laude, and now works as a marketing director for a tech company in Scottsdale. She is smart, ambitious, and beautiful in the way that turns heads when she walks into a room. David, my younger child, took a different path but found success in his own way. He studied culinary arts at the Scottsdale Culinary Institute and now owns a small but successful catering business specializing in fusion Mexican cuisine. He is creative, funny, and has the kind of warm personality that makes people feel instantly comfortable. Both of my children have college degrees, stable careers, and bright futures. As a single mother working in education, that felt like winning the lottery. After my divorce from Miguel 8 years ago, I threw myself even deeper into being the kind of mother I wished I had growing up. My own mother was loving but distant, overwhelmed by raising 4 children on a teacher's salary after my father left when I was 12. There was never enough money, never enough time, never enough attention to go around. I promised myself that my children would never feel that uncertainty, never wonder if their needs mattered, never question whether they were loved completely and unconditionally. So when Rachel announced her engagement to Jason 18 months ago, I was thrilled. Jason seemed like a good man. Stable, employed, respectful. He worked as a software engineer and had a steady, reliable personality that balanced out Rachel's more intense energy. At the engagement party, held at an upscale restaurant in Old Town Scottsdale, I watched my daughter glow with happiness and felt that familiar surge of maternal pride. That night, Rachel pulled me aside and said the words that would set everything in motion. "Mom, I want you to know that I plan to have the wedding of my dreams, and I hope you will help make that possible." She hugged me tightly, and I promised her that I would do whatever I could to give her the perfect wedding day. Over the next few months, I watched the wedding plans unfold with a mixture of excitement and growing concern about the costs. Rachel had champagne tastes on what should have been a beer budget, but every time I gently suggested less expensive alternatives, she would get that wounded look in her eyes and say something like, "I only get married once, Mom." I wanted to be special. The dress alone cost $3,000, purchased at an exclusive bridal boutique in Phoenix where the saleswomen spoke in hushed, reverent tones about designer labels and European lace. When Rachel sent me the photo from the fitting room, she looked absolutely radiant, and I could not bring myself to suggest she find something less expensive. I transferred the money from my savings account that same day. Then came the photographer. Rachel had fallen in love with the work of someone who charged $8,000 for wedding photography, more than I spent on groceries in an entire year. But she had shown me the portfolio, pointing out the artistic lighting and the way this photographer captured intimate moments between couples, and I could see why she wanted him. Another transfer from savings. The venue was next. Rachel had her heart set on a place called Desert Botanical Dreams, an upscale event space that specialized in outdoor weddings with stunning mountain views. The rental fee alone was $12,000, not including catering, flowers, or any of the other necessities. When she asked if I could help with the venue costs, I said yes without hesitation, even though it meant dipping into the retirement fund I had been building for 15 years. Month by month, the requests kept coming. Could I help with the florist, the wedding cake, the band, the hotel rooms for out-of-town guests? Each request came with detailed explanations about why this particular vendor or service was essential to her vision, and each time I found a way to make it work. I picked up extra tutoring sessions, sold some jewelry from my marriage, and even took out a small loan against my house. By the time winter turned to spring, I had contributed over $45,000 to Rachel Wedding Fund. I kept track in a small notebook, not because I planned to ask for repayment, but because the amounts were so large that I needed to see them written down to believe they were real. $45,000 was more than I made in an entire year after taxes. It represented years of careful saving, coupon clipping, and saying no to vacations and new clothes and dinners out with friends. But seeing Rachel happy felt worth every penny. She would call me several times a week with updates about dress alterations and menu tastings and flower arrangements, her voice bright with excitement. She would text me photos from cake tastings and ask my opinion about different color schemes. For the first time since her teenage years, I felt like we were truly close, like we were partners in creating something beautiful together. Jason's family was also involved in the planning, though I did not interact with them much during those months. His mother Linda was a real estate agent who had very strong opinions about everything from the invitation fonts to the cocktail hour music. From what Rachel told me, Linda was contributing to the wedding financially as well, though the specific amounts were never clear. Jason also had two older sisters who were helping with various aspects of the planning. I met Linda formally only twice during the engagement period. The first time was at a family barbecue at Rachel and Jason's apartment, where Linda spent most of the evening talking about her other son's wedding from 3 years earlier and how elegant it had been. She had a way of speaking that made everything sound like a comparison, and I got the distinct impression that she found our family lacking in some indefinable way. The second time was at the engagement party, where Linda wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment and spent the evening networking with other guests like she was at a business conference. She was polite to me but distant, the kind of distant that is not quite rude enough to call out but makes you feel like you are being evaluated and found wanting. Still, I assumed that any tensions would work themselves out as we got closer to the wedding date. Rachel seemed to navigate the relationship with Linda skillfully, and Jason appeared to stay mostly out of the wedding planning details. My main concern was making sure I could continue contributing financially without completely depleting my savings account. That changed last Thursday evening. I was sitting at my kitchen table grading college recommendation letters for my senior students when my phone buzzed with a text message from Rachel. The timestamp showed 7:43 p.m., and the message was unusually long, which should have been my first warning sign. Rachel typically communicated in short bursts, quick updates, links to wedding inspiration photos, or brief requests for information. But this message was different. It started without any greeting or context, jumping straight into what felt like a prepared speech. "Hey Mom," it began, "so Jason and I have been working with his mom Linda on the final wedding details, and we have run into a small issue with the guest count." I set down my red pen and gave the message my full attention. The venue can only accommodate 150 people maximum due to fire code restrictions, and with both our families plus our friend groups plus Jason work colleagues plus Linda extended family, we are looking at close to 200 people. It is becoming a real problem. My stomach started to tighten as I continued reading. After talking it through extensively with Jason and his family, we have decided that the best solution is to keep the actual ceremony really intimate. Just immediate family and closest friends. I know this might be disappointing, but we would love for you to still be part of our special day by watching the live stream we are setting up. I read that sentence 3 times, certain I had misunderstood something. My daughter was uninviting me from her wedding and offering me a live stream as a substitute. The message continued. We are hiring a professional videography service specifically for this, so you will be able to see everything in real time with multiple camera angles. It will be almost like being there in person, maybe even better because you will have the best view of everything. The message ended with what felt like an afterthought. I know you will understand that we are just trying to make the best of a difficult situation. Love you, Mom. Followed by a heart emoji that somehow made the whole thing feel even worse. I set my phone down on the table and stared at the stack of recommendation letters in front of me. These were letters I was writing for students who needed advocates, people who would fight for their dreams and see their potential when others could not. The irony was crushing. Here I was, spending my evenings advocating for other people's children while my own child was casually discarding me from the most important day of her life. The first emotion I felt was not anger but confusion. How had we gotten to this point? I ran through the months of wedding planning in my mind, looking for signs I had missed, conversations I had misunderstood, moments where I had overstepped boundaries I did not know existed. But I could not find them. From my perspective, we had been partners in creating Rachel's dream wedding. Apparently, from her perspective, I had been a bank account with emotional attachments. I picked up my phone and scrolled back through months of our text conversations. There it was, laid out in digital black and white, request after request for money, punctuated by thank you messages and updates about wedding plans. Very few of those messages contained questions about my life, my work, my thoughts about anything unrelated to the wedding. When had our relationship become so transactional? The second emotion was a deep, aching sadness. Not just about missing the wedding, though that was devastating enough, but about what this revealed about how my daughter saw me. To Rachel, I was apparently not a person whose presence was essential to her happiness, but rather a resource to be managed and utilized as needed. The woman who had given birth to her, raised her, supported her through college and career changes and heartbreaks, was not important enough to merit a place at her wedding ceremony. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made over the years, not just financially but emotionally and personally. The weekends I had spent helping her move apartments instead of dating or socializing. The vacations I had skipped to pay for her study abroad program. The times I had listened to her vent about work problems or relationship drama for hours, offering advice and support and unconditional love. I thought about the months leading up to this moment, when I had been so happy to be included in her wedding planning. All those phone calls and text messages and shopping trips that I had treasured as precious mother-daughter bonding time. Had they been precious to her? Or had they simply been necessary steps in securing my financial contributions? The third emotion, surprisingly, was relief. Not relief about missing the wedding, but relief about finally understanding where I stood in my daughter hierarchy of priorities. For months, I had been confused by Linda's coolness toward me, puzzled by certain comments Rachel had made about Jason's family versus my family, uncertain about my role in the wedding planning process. Now it was crystal clear. I was the financier, not the family. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, watching the last of the desert sunset fade from my windows. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, and the recommendation letters remained unfinished, but I could not bring myself to move. I kept rereading Rachel's message, looking for some acknowledgement of what she was asking me to accept, some recognition that being excluded from your child's wedding might be painful. But there was none. The tone of the message was casual, matter-of-fact, even slightly cheerful, as if she were informing me about a change in the dinner menu rather than disinviting me from one of the most significant moments in both our lives. The phrase "I know you will understand" particularly stung. It assumed not only my compliance but my cheerful acceptance of a situation that no mother should have to understand. Finally, around 10 o'clock, I picked up my phone and typed a response. My first instinct was to write a long message explaining how hurt I was, asking questions about how we had reached this point, demanding explanations and apologies. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the guidance counselor in me, trained to think strategically about communication and consequences. Maybe it was simple exhaustion. Instead, I typed 4 words. Okay. Have a beautiful day. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed. I woke up the next morning feeling strangely calm, as if a fever had broken overnight. The hurt was still there, but it had transformed into something cleaner and more focused. Clarity. For the first time in months, I could see the situation without the fog of maternal guilt and people-pleasing instincts that usually clouded my judgment. My daughter had made a choice. She had chosen to prioritize her future mother-in-law opinions over her own mother presence at her wedding. She had chosen to treat me like a vendor rather than a parent. She had chosen to assume my understanding and compliance, rather than having a difficult conversation about genuine constraints. Now it was time for me to make a choice. I followed my usual morning routine, coffee on the patio, shower, getting dressed for work. But everything felt different. The sunrise looked more vivid. The coffee tasted better. Even my reflection in the bathroom mirror looked somehow more present, more real, as if I had been slightly out of focus for months and had suddenly snapped into sharp relief. At work, I threw myself into my usual Friday tasks. Meeting with students about college applications, reviewing transcripts, returning phone calls from parents. But during my lunch break, instead of eating at my desk as usual, I got in my car and drove to Desert Financial Credit Union. The branch manager, Maria Gonzalez, had been helping me with my banking for over a decade. She had guided me through the financial complexities of my divorce, helped me set up college funds for my children, and assisted with refinancing my mortgage when interest rates dropped. She knew my financial situation better than anyone except my accountant. "Susan," she said warmly when I walked into her office. "How nice to see you. How are the wedding plans coming along?" I sat down in the familiar chair across from her desk. "Actually, that is what I wanted to talk to you about. I need to make some changes to Rachel's wedding fund account." Maria pulled up my account information on her computer screen. "Course. What kind of changes?" "I want to close the account and transfer everything into my retirement fund." Her fingers paused over the keyboard. "Everything? Are you sure?" He nodded. "How much is currently in that account?" She scrolled through the information. "Let me see. It looks like you have $47,832.18 in the wedding fund account. That includes the transfers you made last month for the venue deposit and the photography down payment. $47,000. Hearing the exact amount spoken out loud made my breath catch. That was more money than most families spent on a car. It was more than many people made in an entire year. It represented countless hours of extra work, years of careful budgeting, and decades of putting my children's needs ahead of my own financial security. "Susan," Maria said gently, "this is a significant amount of money to move. Can you tell me what has changed with the wedding plans?" I found myself telling her everything. About the text message, about being uninvited, about the live stream offer, about feeling like a bank account rather than a mother. Maria listened without interrupting, her expression growing more incredulous with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Susan, I have been working in banking for 25 years, and I have seen a lot of family financial drama. But this is particularly troubling. You are being asked to fund an event you are not allowed to attend. That is not how healthy families treat each other." She continued, "From a purely financial perspective, moving this money back to your retirement account is absolutely the right decision. You are 56 years old, and you need to prioritize your own financial security. But from a personal perspective, I think you are doing something even more important. You are setting boundaries." The paperwork took about 30 minutes to complete. Transfer forms, verification signatures, updated beneficiary information for the retirement account. With each document I signed, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. $47,000 was flowing back to where it belonged, securing my future instead of funding my exclusion from my daughter's celebration. As I prepared to leave, Maria said, "Susan, I know this is a difficult situation, but I want you to know that I think you are handling it with remarkable grace. Setting boundaries with adult children is never easy, especially when money is involved. But sometimes it is the most loving thing you can do." Walking out of the bank, I felt lighter than I had in months. The Arizona sun felt warm on my face, and for the first time in weeks, I was not mentally calculating wedding expenses or worrying about upcoming vendor payments. The money was safe, growing for my retirement instead of subsidizing my own marginalization. I decided not to return to work for the afternoon. Instead, I drove to Home Depot and bought supplies for a project I had been putting off for months: renovating my back patio. If I was going to be watching Rachel's wedding on a live stream, I might as well have a beautiful space to do it from. Loading decorative stones and outdoor plants into my car, I felt a sense of purpose I had not experienced in years. This was my time, my money, my choice. For once, I was investing in my own happiness instead of someone else's dreams. That evening, I kept my phone turned off and spent the time working in my backyard. I planted new flowers, arranged decorative stones around my existing plants, and set up a small seating area where I could watch the desert sunsets. Physical work felt good after months of emotional turmoil. My hands were dirty, my back was sore, and I was more content than I had been in months. Saturday morning brought the inevitable reckoning. I turned on my phone to find 36 missed calls and 28 text messages, all from Rachel. The messages showed a clear progression from confusion to panic to anger. The first few were questions. "Mom, why are you not answering? Did something happen to your phone?" Then came the wedding-related panic. "The venue called and said one of our payments was declined. Can you call me back ASAP?" By mid-morning, the tone had shifted to frustration. "Mom, this is serious. We need to talk about what happened with the bank. The wedding planner is freaking out." And finally, by late afternoon, "I cannot believe you are doing this to me. This is my wedding day we are talking about." The voicemails told the same story. Rachel's voice progressed from concerned to frantic to angry as the reality of the situation became clear. The final voicemail, left at 11:47 p.m., was her crying into the phone. "Mom, please call me back. I do not understand what I did wrong. The whole wedding might be cancelled if we cannot figure this out." I listened to all of the messages, then deleted them one by one. Then I got dressed and went to have breakfast at my favorite cafe, a small family-owned place where the waitresses knew my order and the coffee was always perfect. Sitting in a sunny booth with my huevos rancheros and coffee, I felt remarkably peaceful. Other diners were chatting about weekend plans, families were sharing meals, and life was continuing in all its ordinary beautiful ways. The world had not ended because I set a boundary with my daughter. In fact, the world felt more solid and real than it had in months. After breakfast, I drove to the Desert Botanical Garden, a place I had always loved but rarely visited because I was usually too busy with other people's needs and schedules. I spent the morning walking among the desert plants and cacti, reading about their resilience and adaptation strategies. There was something profoundly peaceful about being surrounded by living things that had learned to thrive in harsh conditions by setting clear boundaries about what they would and would not tolerate. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. I was in my backyard, continuing the patio renovation project, when I heard someone call my name from the front of the house. I walked around to find Janet Stevens, Rachel's former college roommate, standing in my driveway looking uncomfortable. Janet and Rachel had been close friends throughout college and for several years afterward, but they had drifted apart when Janet moved to Denver for a job opportunity. I had always liked Janet. She was thoughtful, independent, and had a good influence on Rachel during their friendship. "Mrs. Martinez," Janet said, "I hope you do not mind me dropping by like this. Rachel gave me your address years ago, and I was in town visiting my parents." "Of course not," I replied, genuinely happy to see her. "Would you like some iced tea? It is hot out here." We sat on my newly renovated patio, and Janet explained that Rachel had reached out to her the previous evening, crying and asking if Janet could talk to me about the wedding situation. She said you had some kind of disagreement about the guest list and that you were refusing to help with the wedding costs anymore. I found myself telling Janet the whole story: the months of financial contributions, the casual text message disinviting me from the ceremony, the live stream offer, and my decision to redirect the money to my retirement account. Janet listened carefully, asking clarifying questions and nodding thoughtfully. When I finished, Janet was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Martinez, I have to tell you something. This sounds exactly like the Rachel I remember from college, and I do not mean that as a compliment. She continued, Rachel always had a way of making people feel special when she needed something from them, and then treating them like they were invisible once she got what she wanted. She did it with professors, with boyfriends, even with me sometimes. I called her out on it once, and she got so defensive that we did not speak for 3 months. Janet paused, then said, I love Rachel like a sister, but she has some real blind spots when it comes to how she treats people. And honestly, reading between the lines of what she told me last night, it sounds like she has been treating you like an ATM for months without even realizing it. We talked for over an hour about Rachel, about boundaries, about the challenges of loving someone who takes your love for granted. Janet shared stories about her own experiences setting limits with demanding friends and family members. By the time she left, I felt validated in a way I had not expected. You did the right thing, Janet said as she prepared to leave. And honestly, Rachel needs to learn this lesson. She is 30 years old, and she cannot keep expecting other people to solve her problems and fund her dreams. Maybe losing the fancy wedding will teach her something about priorities and gratitude. Sunday brought another unexpected visitor. I was having my morning coffee on the patio when David's car pulled into my driveway. My son looked tired and stressed as he walked around to the backyard, carrying a white bakery box from my favorite pastry shop. Peace offering, he said with a weak smile, setting the box on my patio table. Can we talk? I poured him a cup of coffee and waited. David had always been the peacemaker in our family, the one who smoothed over conflicts and tried to keep everyone happy. But he also had a tendency to prioritize keeping the peace over addressing the actual problems that created conflict in the first place. Mom, he said, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I remembered from his childhood, Rachel is beside herself. She called me at 6 this morning crying about the wedding being cancelled and vendors threatening to sue and all kinds of drama. I am sorry to hear she is upset, I said calmly. The thing is, David continued, she said the wedding planner called and told them they are short about $20,000. Apparently, some of the vendor payments bounced or got declined or something. I sipped my coffee and waited for him to continue. Mom, she needs your help. I know you two had some kind of disagreement about the guest list, but this is her wedding day we are talking about. It is supposed to be the happiest day of her life. There it was. The expectation that I should prioritize Rachel's happiness over my own dignity, that I should ignore being excluded from the wedding as long as I continued funding it. The assumption that mothers exist to solve problems and write checks regardless of how they are treated. David, I said carefully, what exactly did Rachel tell you about our disagreement? He shifted uncomfortably. She said there were some issues with the venue capacity and that not everyone could attend the ceremony, but that you could watch it online. And that you got upset and pulled your financial support. Do you think that is a reasonable summary of what happened? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, venue limitations are real things. Maybe she could have handled it better, but wedding planning is stressful. People make mistakes. I set down my coffee cup and looked at my son. Really looked at him. David was a good person with a kind heart, but he had grown up watching me absorb disappointment and sacrifice my needs for the sake of family harmony. To him, my current behavior probably seemed selfish and extreme because he had never seen me prioritize my own dignity before. David, I said, let me ask you something. If you were getting married and your future in-laws told me that I could not attend your wedding but I could watch it on a computer screen, how do you think I should respond? He looked uncomfortable. That is not really the same thing, though. Rachel is dealing with Jason family and their expectations. She is trying to keep everyone happy. By excluding her own mother. By making the best of a difficult situation, he replied. But his voice lacked conviction. I could see that David genuinely believed what he was saying, but I could also see that he had not really thought through the implications of what he was asking me to accept. In his mind, I was the one being unreasonable because I was the one disrupting the status quo. The idea that the status quo itself might be unreasonable had not occurred to him. We talked for another hour, with David alternating between logical arguments about family loyalty and emotional appeals about Rachel's happiness. He pointed out that weddings are expensive and stressful, that Jason family was contributing significantly to the costs, that modern weddings often involve difficult compromises about guest lists. All of his points were valid, but none of them addressed the fundamental issue. that I was being asked to pay for an event I was not allowed to attend, and that my adult daughter had communicated this decision via text message as if it were a minor scheduling change rather than a devastating rejection. Finally, I said, "David, I need you to understand something. This is not about the money. This is about respect. Rachel has been treating me like a vendor rather than her mother, and I will not continue to enable that behavior." "But Mom," he said, his voice taking on a pleading tone, "if you do not help with the remaining costs, the whole wedding might be cancelled. All that money you already spent will be wasted, and Rachel will be heartbroken." "The money I already spent is gone regardless of what happens next," I replied. "And Rachel heartbreak is not my responsibility to prevent, especially when it results from her own choices." David left without resolution, but not before saying, "Mom, I hope you reconsider this. Rachel might not handle losing her dream wedding very well, and I am worried about what this will do to your relationship with her long term." After he drove away, I sat on my patio for a long time, thinking about his final words. Was I willing to risk my relationship with Rachel over this issue? Was maintaining my dignity worth potentially losing my daughter? But then I realized I was asking the wrong questions. The right questions were, what kind of relationship did I actually have with Rachel if it was contingent on my financial contributions? What kind of love was I modeling for my children if I taught them that boundaries were negotiable when emotions ran high? What kind of future did we have together if I continued enabling behavior that was fundamentally disrespectful? Monday morning brought an email from Rachel with the subject line, "Please read this." The message was long, rambling, and cycled between anger, guilt, and desperation. She started by listing all the ways the wedding was falling apart: vendors canceling contracts, deposits being forfeited, friends and family asking uncomfortable questions about why the guest list kept changing. Then she shifted to personal attacks. "I cannot believe you are willing to ruin my wedding over something so petty. This is supposed to be the most important day of my life, and you are turning it into a nightmare because you did not get your way about the guest list." The middle section was pure guilt manipulation. "I have always looked up to you and tried to make you proud. I do not understand how the mother who taught me about love and family can now be so cruel and selfish. Dad would be ashamed of how you are acting." The reference to her father, my ex-husband who had contributed exactly $0 and zero effort to her wedding planning, was particularly galling. Miguel had been a loving but irresponsible father who disappeared from our lives for months at a time, and then reappeared with expensive gifts and promises he never kept. The idea that he would have moral authority over my current decisions was both infuriating and absurd. The email ended with a final desperate plea. "If you change your mind and decide to help us, we can probably still save most of the original wedding plans. But we need to know by Wednesday because that is when the venue contract expires. Please do not let your pride destroy the most important day of my life." My pride. As if wanting to attend my daughter's wedding was about pride rather than love. As if setting boundaries about how I would allow myself to be treated was vanity rather than self-respect. As if decades of sacrifice and support counted for nothing compared to one decision to prioritize my own dignity. I archived the email without responding. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Jason called me directly, something he had never done before in the 18 months since he and Rachel got engaged. His voice was strained and formal when I answered the phone. "Hi Susan," he said, "I hope I am not bothering you at work. I was wondering if we could talk about the wedding situation." I stepped out of my office and into the hallway for privacy. "Of course, Jason. What would you like to discuss?" There was a long pause. Then he said, "Look, I am going to be honest with you. I did not know about the guest list change until after Rachel sent you that text message. She told me afterward that she had explained the venue limitations to you and that you understood. This was the first crack in the narrative I had been hearing from everyone else." "What did she tell you exactly?" "She said that you were disappointed about not being able to attend the ceremony but that you were supportive of the decision and excited about watching the livestream." Another pause. "But then when the vendor payment started getting declined, she told me you were angry about the guest list and had pulled your financial support." I could hear the confusion in his voice, and I realized that Jason had been getting conflicting information about what was actually happening. Rachel had apparently minimized the situation to him initially, and then escalated her version of events when the financial consequences became clear. "Jason," I said carefully, "what would you expect my reaction to be if I were uninvited from your wedding via text message after contributing nearly $50,000 to the wedding fund?" The silence stretched so long that I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he said quietly, "I honestly did not realize you had contributed that much money. Rachel handles most of the vendor communications and payments. I just assumed the costs were being split more evenly between both families." We talked for 20 more minutes, with Jason asking detailed questions about the timeline of events and the specific language Rachel had used in her text message. I could tell he was trying to piece together a more complete picture of what had actually happened, and I got the impression that Rachel's version of events had some significant gaps. "Susan," he said finally, "I owe you an apology. I do not think I understood how this situation looked from your perspective, and I definitely did not understand how much you had already contributed financially. That changes things significantly." "I appreciate that, Jason. The thing is," he continued, "we are in a really difficult position now. My mother has very strong opinions about wedding planning, and she convinced Rachel that having a smaller ceremony was more elegant and meaningful. I went along with it because I wanted to avoid family drama, but I can see now that it created a much bigger problem." He paused, then said, "I want you to know that if it were up to me, you would absolutely be at our wedding. You are Rachel's mother, and you have been incredibly generous and supportive throughout this entire process. The fact that you are not invited to the actual ceremony is wrong, and I am sorry it happened." Jason's apology meant more to me than he probably realized. It was the first acknowledgement I had received from anyone in Rachel's circle that my exclusion was inappropriate, not just unfortunate. It was validation that my feelings were reasonable, not just the overreaction of a difficult mother. "Thank you for saying that, Jason. It means a lot to hear. I'm going to talk to Rachel and my mother about this," he said. "I cannot promise that I can fix everything, but I want to try to find a solution that includes you in the ceremony, even if it means scaling back some other aspects of the wedding." After we hung up, I felt cautiously hopeful for the first time in days. Jason seemed genuinely committed to making things right, and his perspective as the groom carried significant weight in the wedding planning process. Maybe there was a way forward that did not involve choosing between my dignity and my relationship with my daughter. But that hope was short-lived. The next morning, Tuesday, brought a furious voicemail from Linda, Jason's mother. Her tone was icy and condescending as she explained that Jason had misunderstood the situation and that the guest list decisions were final. "Susan," her recorded voice said, "I understand you are disappointed about the ceremony arrangements, but frankly, this tantrum you are throwing is inappropriate and selfish. Rachel is trying to plan the wedding of her dreams, and instead of supporting her, you are creating unnecessary drama and stress." She continued, "Jason seems to think we can somehow accommodate more guests, but that is simply not realistic given the venue constraints and the budget we have established. We have already made significant financial commitments based on the current guest count, and changing everything now would be both expensive and chaotic." The voicemail ended with a barely veiled threat. "I hope you will reconsider your position and choose to support Rachel during this important time in her life. Weddings are about bringing families together, not driving them apart with petty disputes over logistics." Petty disputes over logistics. That was how Linda characterized a mother being excluded from her daughter's wedding. I deleted the voicemail and made a mental note to have as little interaction with Linda as possible going forward, regardless of how the current situation resolved itself. That afternoon brought another surprise visitor. I came home from work to find a young woman sitting on my front steps, someone I recognized but had not seen in several years. It was Sophia Chen, Rachel's best friend from high school and college, who now lived in Seattle working for a tech startup. "Mrs. Martinez," Sophia said, standing up as I approached, "I hope you do not mind me dropping by like this. Rachel gave me your address and I was hoping we could talk." Sophia had always been one of my favorite of Rachel's friends. She was thoughtful, ambitious, and had a quiet strength that balanced out Rachel's more dramatic tendencies. During high school, Sophia had spent countless weekends at our house, and I had watched her navigate family pressures about college and career choices with impressive maturity. I invited her inside and made tea while she explained that Rachel had called her the previous evening, crying about the wedding crisis and begging Sophia to fly to Phoenix to help mediate the situation with me. She is really struggling, Mrs. Martinez, Sophia said carefully. She feels like her whole world is falling apart, and she does not understand why you are so upset about the guest list issue. I sat down across from Sophia and chose my words carefully. What exactly did Rachel tell you about the guest list issue? Sophia repeated essentially the same narrative I had been hearing from everyone else: venue limitations, difficult decisions, family politics, and an overreaction from me about not being able to attend the ceremony in person. I found myself telling Sophia the complete story, including details about my financial contributions that Rachel had apparently not shared with her best friend. Sophia's expression grew more troubled with each revelation. Wait, she said, interrupting me mid-sentence. You contributed almost $50,000 to this wedding. $47,800 to be exact. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Mrs. Martinez, Rachel told me that the families were splitting the wedding costs roughly equally. She never mentioned that you had contributed that much money. We talked for over an hour, with Sophia asking detailed questions about the timeline of events and the specific communications I had received from Rachel. I could see her mental picture of the situation shifting as she gathered more complete information. I need to ask you something, Sophia said finally, and I hope you will be honest with me. Do you think Rachel deliberately misled me about what happened, or do you think she genuinely sees the situation differently? It was a perceptive question that got to the heart of what I had been wrestling with for days. Was my daughter manipulative, or was she simply so accustomed to my unconditional support that she could not recognize how unreasonable her expectations had become? I think I said slowly that Rachel has gotten so used to me saying yes to everything that she cannot imagine me saying no to anything. I think she genuinely believes that my love for her means I should be willing to accept any treatment as long as it makes her happy. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense, actually. Rachel has always been the kind of person who assumes that people who love her will go along with whatever she wants, even when what she wants is not reasonable or fair. She paused, then said, Mrs. Martinez, can I tell you something? I love Rachel like a sister, but she has some real blind spots when it comes to considering other people's feelings. She did something similar to me during college. She planned a spring break trip and then uninvited me at the last minute because she wanted to bring a guy she was dating instead. When I got upset about it, she could not understand why I was hurt because she offered to help me plan a different trip. Sophia's story sounded depressingly familiar. Rachel Pattern seemed to be making decisions based on what she wanted in the moment, and then expecting everyone else to adjust their expectations and emotions accordingly. The thing is, Sophia continued, Rachel never learned to handle disappointment very well because she has always had people in her life who protected her from consequences. You, her teachers, even me sometimes. We all enabled her by making excuses for her behavior instead of calling her out on it. Before Sophia left, she asked me a question that stayed with me for days. What do you think would happen if Rachel actually had to face the consequences of her choices without anyone rescuing her? I did not have an answer, but I was beginning to think I might find out. Wednesday morning brought the deadline Linda had mentioned in her voicemail. If the remaining wedding costs were not paid by end of business that day, several vendors would cancel their contracts and the venue reservation would be forfeited. I knew this because Rachel sent me a text message at 6:17 a.m. with a countdown timer and a final plea for help. Mom, we have less than 12 hours to save the wedding. Please do not let this be how our story ends. I love you and I need you. Please call me. I read the message twice, then turned off my phone and got ready for work. I had meetings scheduled with 3 different students about their college applications, and I was determined not to let my family drama interfere with my professional responsibilities. But focusing on work proved difficult. Between meetings, I found myself thinking about Rachel's message and the countdown timer she had included. Part of me wanted to call the bank and reverse the transfer, to swoop in and save the day like I had done so many times before. The maternal instinct to protect my child from disappointment was almost overwhelming. But another part of me, the part that had been growing stronger over the past few days, recognized that rescuing Rachel now would teach her exactly the wrong lesson. It would confirm that her mother boundaries were negotiable, that emotional manipulation was an effective strategy, and that actions did not really have consequences as long as you could find someone else to absorb them. At lunch, I did something I had not done in months. I drove to a nearby park, bought a sandwich from a food truck, and sat on a bench feeding ducks and watching families play on the playground equipment. It was peaceful in a way I had almost forgotten was possible. For the first time in months, I was not mentally calculating wedding expenses or worrying about vendor deadlines or trying to solve problems that were not mine to solve. A mother was pushing her toddler on a swing nearby, and I watched as the little boy squealed with delight every time the swing reached its highest point. The mother was laughing too, completely present in that moment of simple joy with her child. I realized that I could not remember the last time Rachel and I had shared a moment like that. Uncomplicated, mutual, focused on connection rather than transaction. That afternoon, I returned to work to find a voicemail from Jason. His voice was tired and strained as he explained that he had spent the previous evening arguing with both Rachel and his mother about including me in the wedding ceremony. "I tried, Susan," he said, "but my mother is absolutely refusing to budge on the guest list. She says that changing things now would be disrespectful to the other family members who have already made travel arrangements based on the current plans." He continued, "Rachel is caught in the middle, and honestly, she is not handling the stress very well. She has been crying for 3 days straight, and I am worried about her mental state. I know this is not your problem to solve, but I wanted you to know that I am doing everything I can to find a compromise." Jason's voicemail ended with an unexpected revelation. "I also wanted you to know that I had a long conversation with my mother about the financial contributions to this wedding, and I learned some things that surprised me. It turns out that our families have not been splitting the costs as evenly as I thought. Your contributions have been significantly larger than what my family has provided. This was interesting information, though it did not change my decision. The issue was not really about money. It was about respect and inclusion and being treated like a person rather than a resource." Thursday morning brought silence. No calls, no texts, no voicemails. I assumed this meant that the wedding vendor contracts had expired and that Rachel was dealing with the aftermath of her choices. Part of me felt sad about this outcome, but a larger part felt relieved that the crisis phase was finally over. I spent the morning at work and the afternoon working in my garden, planting new flowers and enjoying the physical satisfaction of creating something beautiful with my own hands. The desert spring weather was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of blooming Palo Verde trees. Around dinner time, David appeared in my backyard without warning, looking exhausted and stressed. He had dark circles under his eyes and the rumpled appearance of someone who had not been sleeping well. "Mom," he said without preamble, "we need to talk." I gestured for him to sit down at my patio table and offered him a glass of iced tea. He accepted the drink but ignored the chair, choosing instead to pace around my small garden area. "Rachel called me at 4 this morning," he said, running his hands through his hair. "She was hysterical. Apparently, the venue cancelled their contract yesterday, and most of the vendors followed suit. The wedding is officially off." I absorbed this information without comment, waiting for him to continue. "She has been calling everyone she knows, trying to find a way to salvage something, but everything is either booked or too expensive. Jason's family is furious, her friends are asking awkward questions, and she feels like her life is falling apart." David stopped pacing and looked directly at me. "Mom, she needs help. Real help. Not just money but emotional support. She is talking about eloping to Vegas or just canceling the wedding entirely and staying engaged indefinitely. What would you like me to do about that, David?" He stared at me as if I had asked an incomprehensible question. "Help her. Talk to her. Fix this situation before it gets any worse." I set down my iced tea and chose my words carefully. "David, Rachel is a 30-year-old woman with a college degree and a successful career. She is perfectly capable of handling the consequences of her own decisions without me rescuing her. But she is your daughter," he said, his voice rising with frustration. "She is family. You do not just abandon family when they make mistakes. I am not abandoning her. I am declining to enable behavior that is disrespectful and hurtful. There is a difference. We argued for another hour, with David alternating between guilt trips about family loyalty and logical arguments about the importance of forgiveness. He pointed out that Rachel was under enormous stress, that wedding planning was notoriously difficult, that everyone makes mistakes when they are overwhelmed. All of his points were valid, but none of them addressed the fundamental issue: that Rachel had excluded me from her wedding and still expected me to pay for it, and that this expectation revealed a profound lack of respect for me as a person. David, I said finally, let me ask you something. If your future spouse family told me that I could not attend your wedding but I could watch it on a computer, and then asked me to pay $20,000 to help fund the event I was not allowed to attend, what would you expect me to do? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, that would never happen because I would not let it happen. Exactly. You would not let it happen because you respect me and value my presence in your life. Rachel apparently does not. David left without resolution, but his final comment stayed with me. Mom, I understand why you are angry, but at some point, you have to decide what matters more, being right or having a relationship with your daughter. That night, I sat on my patio for a long time, thinking about David's words. Was this really about being right, or was it about something more fundamental? Was I willing to sacrifice my relationship with Rachel to make a point about boundaries and respect? But then I realized that David's framing was false. This was not a choice between being right and having a relationship. This was about what kind of relationship I was willing to have. A relationship based on my unconditional compliance with Rachel's wishes, regardless of how those wishes affected me, was not actually a relationship at all. It was a transaction. Friday brought an unexpected email from Jason. The subject line was simply "thank you," and the message was brief but heartfelt. Susan, he wrote, I wanted to reach out and thank you for everything you have done to support Rachel and our relationship over the past 18 months. I know the current situation is painful for everyone involved, but I have learned a lot about family dynamics and communication in the process. He continued, Rachel and I have decided to take some time to reassess our wedding plans and our approach to family relationships. We are going to postpone the big celebration and focus on what really matters: our commitment to each other and our respect for the people we love. The email ended with, I hope that someday we can all find a way forward that honors both your boundaries and Rachel's dreams. You deserve to be treated with respect and gratitude, not taken for granted. Jason's email gave me hope that at least one person in this situation was capable of growth and reflection. It also suggested that Rachel might be beginning to understand the consequences of her choices, even if she was not ready to acknowledge them directly. Saturday morning brought a knock on my door. I opened it to find Rachel standing on my porch, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had seen her since she was a child. Her eyes were red from crying, and she was holding a small bouquet of flowers. Daisies, my favorites. Hi Mom, she said quietly. Can we talk? I invited her inside and made coffee while she sat at my kitchen table, staring at her hands. The silence stretched between us, not comfortable but not hostile either. Just the quiet of two people trying to figure out how to bridge a gap that had grown wider than either of them expected. I brought you flowers, she said finally, gesturing to the daisies she had placed on the table. They are beautiful. Thank you. More silence. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, she said, I messed up, did not I? I sat down across from her and waited. The wedding is cancelled, she continued, not meeting my eyes. Not postponed, not rescheduled, cancelled. We lost all the deposits, the venue, the photographer, everything. Jason's family is barely speaking to us, and his mother keeps saying this proves I am not responsible enough to be part of their family. She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her expression I had not seen in years. Genuine uncertainty, the kind that comes from realizing that your actions have consequences you did not anticipate. Jason wants to elope, she said. Just the two of us, somewhere simple and cheap. He says that all the wedding planning drama made him realize what really matters, and what matters is our relationship, not a big party. How do you feel about that? Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, honestly, part of me is relieved. All the planning and stress and family politics. It stopped being about Jason and me months ago. It became about meeting everyone else's expectations and trying to create this perfect day that probably never existed anyway. She paused, then said, "But I am also scared. What if people think we are eloping because we could not afford a real wedding? What if they think we are failures?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "Sweetheart, the people who matter will not think that. They will be happy that you and Jason found a way to commit to each other that feels authentic and meaningful to you." We talked for 3 hours that morning, really talked, in a way we had not done in years. Rachel told me about the pressure she had been feeling from Linda, about her own insecurities about money and social status, about her fear that she was not sophisticated enough to fit into Jason's family. I told her about the loneliness I had been carrying, about feeling like an ATM rather than a mother, about the years of putting everyone else's needs first and losing track of my own identity in the process. It was not an easy conversation. There were tears, moments of defensiveness, and uncomfortable silences when we both had to sit with truths that were hard to hear. But it was real in a way our relationship had not been for a long time. "Mom," Rachel said eventually, "I owe you an apology. Not just for the wedding stuff, but for the way I have been treating you for years. I have been taking your love and support for granted, and I have been assuming that you would always be there no matter how I behaved." She continued, "I realize now that when I sent you that text about watching the wedding on livestream, I was not just uninviting you from an event. I was telling you that your presence in my life was optional, that your feelings did not matter as much as everyone else's comfort." Hearing Rachel acknowledge what had actually happened felt like a weight lifting from my chest. For days, I had been surrounded by people telling me that I was overreacting, being dramatic, prioritizing my pride over family harmony. Having my daughter finally recognize the fundamental disrespect of her actions was both painful and healing. "I forgive you," I said, "and I meant it. But I need you to understand that forgiveness does not mean going back to the way things were. Our relationship needs to change if we want it to be healthy going forward." Rachel nodded. "No. And honestly, I think I need to change in general, not just with you. Jason has been trying to tell me for months that I have unrealistic expectations about what other people should do to make me happy. I did not want to hear it, but maybe it is time to listen." Before she left that day, Rachel asked if I would consider attending their elopement ceremony. "It will be small and simple," she said, "just you and David and Jason's parents if they decide to come. No drama, no politics, just the people who matter most to us." I told her I would think about it, and I meant that too. The hurt was still there, and trust would take time to rebuild. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was talking to my daughter rather than to someone who saw me as a means to an end. Over the following weeks, Rachel and Jason planned a simple ceremony at a small chapel in Sedona, surrounded by the red rock formations that make Arizona famous. The guest list included 8 people: Rachel, Jason, David, me, Jason's parents, and his 2 sisters. No extended family, no college friends, no work colleagues. Just the people who were most important to their daily lives. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. Rachel wore a simple white dress that cost less than the shoes she had originally planned to wear to the big wedding. Jason wore a suit he already owned. The chapel was decorated with wildflowers that grew naturally in the area, and the whole event cost less than what the original wedding cake would have cost. Linda was civil but cool throughout the day, though she did manage to compliment Rachel's dress and tell Jason that she was proud of him. It was not the warm family bonding moment that fairy tales promise, but it was real and honest in a way that felt more valuable than forced harmony. During the small reception afterward, David gave a toast that brought tears to my eyes. He talked about the importance of family, about forgiveness and growth, and about the courage it takes to admit when you have made mistakes and choose to do better. Rachel and Jason wrote their own vows, and listening to them promised to respect each other's boundaries, communicate honestly about difficult topics, and prioritize their relationship over external expectations felt like watching them learn lessons that would serve them well beyond their wedding day. After the ceremony, Rachel pulled me aside and said, "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself. I know I put you through hell these past few months, and I know it would have been easier for you to just write me off as a selfish brat." She continued, "But you did something harder than that. You held your boundaries even when it hurt both of us, and you forced me to grow up in a way I probably should have done years ago. I am grateful for that, even though it sucked to go through it." The months following the wedding brought gradual healing and rebuilding. Rachel and I talked regularly, but the conversations were different now. More balanced, more reciprocal. She asked about my life, my work, my interests, not just when she needed something from me but because she genuinely wanted to know. She also started contributing to family gatherings instead of just attending them. She brought food to family dinners, helped plan birthday celebrations, and even organized a surprise party for David when his catering business won a local award. Most importantly, she started making decisions based on her own values and priorities rather than trying to meet everyone else's expectations. She and Jason moved into a smaller apartment that they could afford comfortably, started a joint savings account for their future goals, and began building a life that reflected who they actually were rather than who they thought they should be. The money I had redirected to my retirement account remained there, growing steadily and reminding me daily that I had the right to prioritize my own financial security. I used some of it to take a trip to Italy the following spring, something I had dreamed about for decades but never felt I could afford. Sitting in a cafe in Rome, eating gelato and watching the sunset over ancient buildings, I thought about the journey that had brought me there. 6 months earlier, I had been a woman who defined herself primarily by what she could give to other people. I had measured my worth by my children's happiness and my success by their achievements. But somewhere in the process of setting boundaries, holding my ground, and refusing to enable disrespectful behavior, I had rediscovered who I was beneath all those layers of caretaking and people-pleasing. I was Susan Martinez. Not just Rachel mother or David mother, but a complete person with my own dreams, needs, and value. The relationship I built with my daughter after her wedding was stronger and more authentic than what we had before, precisely because it was based on mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. Rachel learned that love does not mean unconditional compliance, and I learned that setting boundaries was not selfish but necessary for healthy relationships. If I had to do it all over again, I would make the same choice. Not because I wanted to hurt my daughter or ruin her wedding, but because I wanted to save our relationship from a pattern that was slowly destroying both of us. Sometimes love means saying yes, and sometimes it means saying no. But it always means refusing to accept treatment that diminishes your humanity. The strongest kind of love, I learned, is the kind that insists on mutual respect. It is the kind that refuses to enable harmful behavior even when enabling would be easier. It is the kind that teaches people that they cannot take your love for granted without consequences. I am 56 years old, and I finally learned to love myself as much as I love my children. That was not selfish. It was revolutionary. It was the foundation on which all my other relationships could become healthier and more authentic. And it was a lesson I wish I had learned sooner, but I am grateful to have learned it at all. Some people might say that I was too harsh, that I should have found a way to attend the original wedding despite being excluded from the ceremony. But I know now that accepting that treatment would have taught Rachel exactly the wrong lesson about how relationships work and what love looks like. By holding my boundaries, I forced her to confront the consequences of her choices and ultimately helped her become a more thoughtful, empathetic person. The temporary pain of that process was worth the long-term health of our relationship. Today, Rachel and Jason are thriving in their marriage. They have learned to communicate about difficult topics, to make decisions together based on their shared values, and to treat both sets of parents with respect and consideration. They are building a life that is authentically theirs, not a performance designed to meet other people's expectations. David has also learned important lessons about boundaries and respect, both in his own relationships and in how he treats family members. He no longer expects me to absorb everyone else's emotions or solve problems that are not mine to solve. And I have learned that the most loving thing you can sometimes do is refuse to enable behavior that hurts both you and the person you love. Setting boundaries is not mean or selfish. It is necessary for healthy relationships and personal growth. The wedding that never happened taught us all more valuable lessons than any celebration could have. It taught us about respect, consequences, authentic love, and the courage required to change destructive patterns. Those lessons will serve my family for generations to come, long after the flowers would have wilted and the photographs would have faded. If this story resonates with you, remember that you have the right to be treated with respect and dignity, even by the people you love most. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no. Sometimes walking away is the only way to save a relationship. And sometimes the strongest kind of love is the kind that refuses to accept anything less than mutual respect and genuine care. Your worth is not determined by what you can give to other people. Your value is not contingent on your willingness to absorb bad treatment in the name of keeping the peace. You deserve relationships that honor your humanity, and you have the right to insist on them, even when insisting is difficult and painful. The strongest kind of love, I have learned, is the love you finally give to yourself.